So this will be week 5 of what I would call traditional apologetics, helping us to better be able to explain our faith, what we believe, and why we believe it. Today's lesson is going to be about the number one reason that people don't believe, other than perhaps laziness, but it is the problem of evil and suffering. And so we're going to talk about that today. Just for scheduling purposes, remember, no Sunday school next week. If you can stand me again, I will be preaching next week. So, yeah, they gave me a week off and then took it back. So, it's all right. And then after that, we have 5 weeks. Who remembers, this is a quiz, no grading, but you'll go to heaven. What is the ultimate apologetic that we defined in week 1? What is the ultimate apologetic? What will win more people to Christ or drive more people away than any rational argument you can come up with? Your life. Your life. And so we are going to have a series of 5 parts after the 4th of July on lives that speak to us. And the first week, because it falls on a mission Sunday where we have a report from one of our mission partners, I'm going to talk briefly about Chuck Colson and Prison Fellowship, but then Robert Doreau, who heads the God of Hope ministry that we serve, he's going to speak from the pulpit, but he doesn't get that much time, so he's going to get a lot of time in this class. And then after that, we're going to look at the lives of people that some of whom you may have heard of and some not. We are going to look at Father Damien, the apostle to the lepers in Malachi. We're going to look at Maximilian Kolbe, the saint of Auschwitz. We are going to look at Polycarp. Really, he'll be first after the prison session. An 86-year-old bishop in around 150 who gave rise to the first martyrdom account that we have outside of the book of Acts. So we'll talk about Polycarp, Father Damien, Maximilian Kolbe, and then we will finish with C.S. Lewis. All right, just a reminder, kaboom, this is why we are doing this. 1 Peter tells us always to be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. And I hope that you have hope, because if you don't, you can't share it. But do it with gentleness and respect. That is maybe particularly important on the subject of evil, where we want to be, there's a difference between being a theologian and a pastor when a young mother is holding a dying baby of hers. There are things not to say, maybe nothing, maybe you say nothing, but you certainly want to consider gentleness and not theological orthodoxy. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, for many people, the biggest stumbling block to our faith is the presence of evil and suffering in the world. How could an all-powerful and all-loving God allow so much pain and suffering to exist? This comes from Peter Kraft and Ronald Ticelli, the Handbook of Christian Apologetics. If you're looking for something to pull off the shelf and answer some of these tough questions, that's a good one. The problem of evil is uniquely important for 3 very serious reasons, and this is well said, I think. First, it is the apparent proof of atheism. There are many proofs or apparent proofs of theism that we have gone through, the clues for God that you remember from previous week. But there is only one argument that even claims to prove that there is no God. That's the problem of pain and suffering. A second reason why the problem of evil is uniquely important is because it is universal. Okay? Everyone wonders why bad things happen to good people. Some wonder why bad things happen at all. But it is universal. It's not isolated, not restricted to a small number of people. And then finally, and most importantly, and this is what I had mentioned earlier, the problem of evil is not merely a theological problem, but an intensely practical one. It is not merely the alienation between two concepts, God and evil, but the alienation between a little child and her father when she looks up through tears and asks him, "Why did you let me hurt so bad?" So that is always something we need to keep in mind. We can have academic discussions, perhaps here this morning, about the problem of evil, but sometimes that is not what is called for. So here are the questions we're going to deal with today. What is evil? Is God responsible for evil? Is evil and suffering evidence against God? Might evil and suffering be evidence for God? What answers do the Gospels give us to the problem of evil? Kaboom. There is a lovely picture for you of the Handbook of Christian Apologetics. And from that we get, evil is not a being or a thing. Beings and things are not evil in themselves. Even the devil is good in his being. He is a good thing gone bad. That's what we have traditionally believed. In fact, a very good thing gone very bad. And I like this a lot. If he had not had the greatest ontological meaning in his existence, in his nature, the greatest ontological goodness of a powerful mind and will, he could never have become as morally corrupt as he is. So, a great goodness turned into a great badness. Evil is the privation, the absence of good, or a corruption, disordering of goodness. So let's not give it an existence of its own. We are not dualists. There are religions, Zoroastrianism for one, that is, there are two forces in the world slugging it out. That is not us. Is evil God's fault? And there we have a lovely quotation with a beautiful picture from the book of the quote, not the pictures, from the book of Genesis. God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. So God did not create evil because it's not a created being or thing. God created everything. Everything he created is good. However, the good things which God created, while not corrupt in themselves, are corruptible. The truth is that the vast majority of human evil and suffering is a direct result of human irresponsibility. I mean, that's kind of our starting place when we look at the evil and suffering in the world. A whole lot of it can be chalked up to us. Weapons and cars, for example, are not evil in themselves, are they? No, but can become so when we use them irresponsibly and injure or kill another person. This I love. If you have not read the Screw Tape Letters, please do. It changed my life. We were coming here to church, having moved from Houston, and we brought our children to the Mother's Morning Out and here to Sunday school. And I was sitting in the pews one day listening to the sermon. That's a good thing. I was coming along. And Bill Edwards, who some of you I know remember well, Bill referred to the Screw Tape Letters in his sermon. And I said, oh, wow, I have that on my shelf. Why do I have that on my shelf? Because it was part of the Time Life series of great books that if you ordered one, you got 10 free, and then you got them for the rest of your life every month. And they were not, it was not a Christian book club. This was just considered by the editors of Time Life to be one of the greatest books ever written, and I think it is. So a memorable example of corruption of something inherently good comes from C.S. Lewis, who we're going to talk about in 5 weeks or so. In this collection of little letters, it's just a couple of pages. That's a nice thing. You can pick it up, put it down. Screwtape, he is a bureaucrat in hell. He's advising his nephew on earth with the lovely name of Wormwood how to win souls for the devil and away from the enemy, who is God. Lewis said, there are enough books out there where people are telling folks how to be good Christians. I'm going to write a book from the other point of view, from the devil telling people how they can come to him or how they can be recruited for him. So that's what this is. And you like the gargoyle or the picture, yeah. Okay, so writing on the subject of sex. I thought y'all would get interested in this. Screwtape says this: never forget that when we are dealing with any pleasure in its healthy and normal and satisfying form, we are, in a sense, on the enemy's ground. I know we have won many a soul through pleasure. All the same, it is his invention, not ours. He made the pleasures. All our research so far has not enabled us to produce one. All we can do is encourage the humans to take the pleasures which our enemy has produced at times or in ways or in degrees which he has forbidden. This is the advice of the bureaucrat in hell to his nephew, the recruiter for Satan on earth. And there he is writing this lovely letter. It says, we've never created anything good. All we can do is mess up something that God has created. And heaven knows we have. So, how does this happen? Why do we use God's good gifts irresponsibly and in disobedience of his command? The answer lies in the nature of love and free will. God created us to love him and each other. A relationship demands love. Love requires a choice. It cannot be forced. God created us in his image. That means when God commands, we have a choice. We can obey or disobey. From our friend from a couple weeks ago, Cliff Knepp, who stands out on college campuses and has wonderful discussions with skeptical college students. We have the choice to love or not love, obey or disobey, because God gave us the ability to make such choices. We call it free will. Why did God give us free will and allow us to misuse it? Because the alternative to free will is not a human being, but a robot, and a robot can't love. So God, as some would say, took a risk. Said, I am going to allow my creatures to make choices. And I realize they may make some bad ones. But as we know, happily, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes, he had a way to deal with that. So we have one other issue here. We can say, well, a lot of it's our fault. Good things that we corrupt or bad choices that we make. But what about earthquakes and birth defects and other calamities that are not the result of human responsibility? Is God responsible for the suffering that results from natural causes? Shirley Guthrie, who I pointed out to you a few weeks ago, I think, who has a wonderful book called Christian Doctrine, a very accessible book on Christian theology. I like his answer. I've got a little more to say about it than he does. If you remember our clues of God, who remembers some of our clues of God? They include the regularity of the laws of nature, for example. The orderliness of nature. We can look at that and get a clue that there's something or someone behind that. And so here's what he says about these quote, natural disasters. Part of the goodness of creation is that our world is not an unpredictable chaos, but at least a relatively ordered, intelligible system of interrelated parts that function in a relatively consistent way we can count on. In fact, that was the motivation for our earliest scientific undertakings, not to prove that there is no God and that we don't need God to explain the world, but that we can figure out how God ordered the world. So all the advances of modern science and technology in making human life in the world safer, healthier, and more productive are the result of the dependability of the laws of physics, biology, and the like. And we know that. And then he goes on to say, but the very regularity of nature that usually helps human life can also hurt it. Given certain conditions, living cells that grow according to their dynamic structure as cells can become malignant cancers. Sometimes they regenerate for the good. Sometimes they can produce something not good. Under certain conditions, the meteorological forces that make our weather predictable and usually favorable to human life can also bring tornadoes, destruction, famine, and death. And I should have made a note of it. I thought I saw a newspaper article or something the other day that said, every so often we need to have a tornado or a hurricane to kind of straighten some things out. I mean, not to punish people, as some nutty pastors have said, but just to reorder the natural world. So Mother Nature is neither our friend nor our enemy. She operates by her own rules that are sometimes beneficial and sometimes harmful. Now, he does not deny the fact that God can intervene. What he's saying here is these are just natural forces doing what they do. And when I've talked about this with some friends, so, well, do you mean that God just created the world and left it alone? No, God intervenes, as we know, to prevent, on occasion, the consequences of human-caused evil. And surely God can do the same with these, quote, natural disasters. This does not eliminate the possibility of God's intervention. Is God responsible for the suffering that results from natural causes? And here's what Guthrie concludes. Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that God willed and created the orderly structure of the world, gave it a relatively independent existence of its own, and does not constantly interfere with it. There is the thought that God can and does sometimes interfere with it to our benefit, but that's not the usual course of things. No, in the sense that God is not directly responsible when that same structure works to our disadvantage. Here is what I would call a more traditional explanation. Doesn't go as in depth. Earthquakes, floods, and other natural disasters remind us that creation groans to be redeemed and renewed. So says Paul in Romans chapter 8, that we'll read in a second. Creation, all creation, is groaning along with the rest of humanity. At such times, we can remember there will be a day when the present creation will give way to the new creation. All things will be made new. That is our hope. And here's what Paul writes in the 8th chapter of Romans. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it. This is reference to the fall with Adam and Eve, affecting not just them, but everything. In hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. So this is the state of nature as well as of humanity. Does the presence of evil disprove an omnipotent, all-loving God? And here we're going to look at some thoughts from Pastor Timothy Keller. Just because you can't see or imagine a good reason why God might allow something to happen doesn't mean that there can't be one. And I'll bet you're already thinking ahead to our next slide. So we'll see. With time and perspective, most of us can see good reasons for at least some of the tragedy and pain that occurs in life. Why couldn't it be possible that from God's vantage point, there are good reasons for all of them? Now, this is where we want to be very careful in our pastoral roles. It's not just pastors who have pastoral roles. You sure do not say this to the person who has just lost a loved one in a tragedy. Oh, don't worry. God works all things for the good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. If they're not in tears yet, they will be. But for our purposes today, let's think about that God, from God's vantage point, may in fact have reasons for all this, many of which we may never know. Or at least until the new heaven and the new earth, and if God has a question and answer session, we can ask him. If you have a God great and transcendent enough to be mad at because he hasn't stopped evil and suffering in the world, then you have at the same moment a God great and transcendent enough to have good reasons for allowing it to continue that you can't know. Indeed, you can't have it both ways. I mentioned, I think, in an earlier week that when I was teaching a new group of inmates at the Travis State Jail earlier this summer, gave them a little bit of my biography. And one fellow very thoughtfully said, what did the loss of your dad when you were 12, what has that done in your life? And I said, well, I certainly wouldn't have thought about this at the time, but as I look back, I realized so many of you guys either do not have fathers you don't like, don't know where your fathers are, and it helps me, I think, relate. And he thought that was an okay answer. So this may be, still was a bad thing, but maybe God did something good with it. And that's our next story. This is the story you were supposed to think of when we were talking about maybe God uses what we call evil for good. Think of the Joseph story in the book of Genesis. Joseph was an arrogant young man whose brothers hated him so much that they sold him into slavery in Egypt. While there, his character was strengthened by the trials and tribulations he went through, and he eventually rose to a position second only to the Pharaoh himself. With the wisdom and power that he had, he was able to save thousands of people, including his own family, from starving. The moral of this story is summed up in Joseph's own words from Genesis 50. When his brothers came to seek his forgiveness, they didn't realize that the one who had been helping them was their brother, but when they did, it was, uh-oh, Judgment Day. But here is what Joseph had to say, which is what God has had to say ever since. Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. The story of Good Friday, which would otherwise, I think I've mentioned this before, be called Horrible Friday. But God turned it to good for the salvation of many, to fit the parallel of the Joseph story. That God transforms and uses evil for good is nowhere more apparent than in the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Was there a blacker day in human history than when the Son of God was executed on a cross? As Keller puts it, with time and perspective, in this case, 3 days, and the appearance of the risen Lord, we know this day not as Bad Friday, but as Good Friday. Does anybody recognize the artwork there? If you have been to the town of Colmar in France, in Alsace-Lorraine, there's a lovely museum, the Museum under the Linden Tree, and this is called the Eisenheim altarpiece. And it takes up a whole room. It's not just one piece of art. It's not just two. It is artwork that constructed an entire altarpiece. And here you maybe have seen this crucifixion. It's by Matthias Grunewald. It is the most distressing depiction of the crucifixion that I know of. And yet, here we have Jesus' ascension and glorification. So we have both. Bad Friday turned into Good Friday. Lewis has something to say about this. He had been a committed atheist after seeing too much evil at work in the world, including losing his mother to cancer when he was 9 and his time in the trenches in World War I. We'll talk about this in several weeks. When he lost his mother to cancer, he put it that just, I'd prayed to God to save her and he didn't, and that was that. And then his time in World War I was difficult. He was wounded and in hospital, and his father never came to see him. And he wrote to his father, he said, "Please come to see me. The other men here do not believe you exist. Because if you did, you'd come see your wounded son." So that was tough. And he wrote a poem called De Profundis, Out of the Depths, in 1919, right after the war, that is as powerful a statement against the goodness of God as you'll ever read. And I hope we can read that in several weeks to show you, because C.S. Lewis is a great defender of the faith. And when you read that, you go, oh my goodness, he wrote that? Yes, he did. But this is good for us, right? With encouragement from some close friends, he became a Christian in his early 30s and went on to write many powerful defenses of God and Christianity, including this reflection on the concept of evil. He says, "My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust." That is the essence of the poem that I just told you about. But how had I got the idea of just and unjust? What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? Because if there's no God, if there's no standard of good and bad, it just is. But where did I get this idea that things were not right? Of course, I could have given up my idea of justice by saying it was nothing but a private idea of my own. But if I did that, then my argument against God collapsed too. For the argument depended on saying that the world really was really unjust, not simply that it did not happen to please my private fancies. Consequently, atheism turned out to be too simple. That the notion of good and bad, just and unjust, right and wrong, if we believe they are something more than just our personal opinion, has to come from somewhere. We talked about that in terms of a clue of God, the moral, our conscience. Here is what Timothy Keller has to say about Lewis's argument. The non-believer in God doesn't have a good basis for being outraged at injustice, which was the reason for rejecting God in the first place. If you are sure that this natural world is unjust and filled with evil, you are assuming the reality of some extranatural or supernatural standard by which to make your judgment. All right, here comes more of what we talked about earlier. All of this philosophizing, while useful for apologetics, doesn't really provide what is needed to help a real-life sufferer, does it? In fact, it can sound cold and irrelevant to someone who is in anguish, wondering why their child was born with a disabling condition or a loved one was killed. That is why we must return to the story of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. This is really the punchline of the whole issue. Jesus is how God chose to deal with the problem of evil and suffering, not by making it disappear, as we will see, but by giving us resources and hope for dealing with it. Les over here was telling me knowing that this lesson was coming up today, he searched for YouTube on evil, and he said, do you know this guy, Tom Reyes? Well, I don't know him. I've met him a couple times, but he's written a wonderful book called Evil and the Justice of God. And it's very accessible. It's a little book. We just read it in our men's group. And in that book, Evil and the Justice of God, he tells this. The Gospels tell the story of Jesus' death as the story of how the downward spiral of evil finally hit bottom with the violent and bloody execution of this man, this prophet who had announced God's kingdom. And if this is the way the Gospels are telling the story of Jesus, what conclusion do the writers want us to draw? There's a picture of the book. And this is something we just have to remember. What the Gospels offer is not a philosophical explanation of evil. What it is or why it is there. Those are questions people ask, and he's saying there aren't answers. Nor a set of suggestions for how we might adjust our lifestyles so that evil will mysteriously disappear from the world. But the Gospels give us the story of an event in which the loving God deals with it. Living God, but loving would be fine too. This is how God rescues his people from the evil in which they are trapped. And he does so through the suffering of Israel's representative, Jesus. Timothy Keller gives us a similar thought. In Jesus Christ, God experienced the greatest depths of pain. And this is really where we come from in our faith, that God has experienced everything and more that we experience. Therefore, though Christianity does not provide the reason for each experience of pain, it provides deep resources for actually facing suffering with hope and courage rather than bitterness and despair. Christianity alone among the world's religions claims that God became uniquely human in Jesus Christ and therefore knows firsthand despair, rejection, loneliness, poverty, bereavement, torture, and imprisonment. On the cross, he went beyond even the worst human suffering and experienced cosmic rejection. My God, why have you forsaken me? And it's important there when we read that to remember those are the opening lines of Psalm 22, a psalm written by David, a psalm written not by a God-man, but by a man experiencing human suffering. And Jesus takes that, not only the suffering, but the lamentation about it upon himself. But then we have to also remember, how long has Jesus been in relationship with God? Remembering our lesson on the Trinity. Always. We lose loved ones and it's a tragedy. It's a heartbreak. It's a killer. What happens when you believe you have been separated from the one you have been in love with since eternity or for eternity? That amplifies, my God, why have you forsaken me? Experience pain that exceeds ours as infinitely as his knowledge and power exceeds ours. In his death, God suffers in love, identifying with the abandoned and God forsaken. Why did he do it? The Bible says that Jesus came on a rescue mission for creation. And I like the way he puts this. He had to pay for our sins so that someday he can end evil and suffering without ending us. Which would be a way to eliminate evil and suffering, right? Well, I mean, the flood. Things got so bad, so all right, let's have a do-over. Timothy Keller again, and this is nicely said. If we ask again the question, why does God allow evil and suffering to continue? and we look at the cross of Jesus, we still do not know what the answer is. However, we now know what the answer isn't. It can't be that he doesn't love us. God takes our misery and suffering so seriously that he was willing to take it on himself. And there is a happy ending, as we know. We know that the ultimate defeat of evil and suffering comes with resurrection and a new heaven and a new earth in which all things are restored and made new. When Jesus comes again, we will hear a loud voice say, "Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away." But we know, right? You don't just say, well, don't worry, someday it's all going to be great. That's true. But what do we do with what we've just learned? At the end of the day, the question is not, why does God allow suffering? Rather, we have to ask, have I accepted God's solution to the problem of suffering? Have I accepted Christ? If so, then we know that we will be with him forever in that new heaven and earth. But we also know that in this world, Jesus has given us a mission to help alleviate suffering by administering his love, forgiveness, and healing, especially to the least of these. And there, to get you ready for 2 weeks from now, we have the message, Hope for the Hopeless, of a man behind bars. So that is what we do with the story of Jesus. We take it on ourselves and go and do likewise for the world. It's not going to eliminate pain and suffering. It will alleviate it, should, and it will give people hope. All right. I think, kaboom, because we did a whole lot last week with the canon on top of other things about the nature of God. So it was either split that up or just finish a little early today. So what questions and thoughts do you have?
I got one.
Yes, Les.
As having done a lot of statistics, we always look at a population of people, like populations of breast cancer patients. And we know any drug is good, it saves lives. Then you talk about it, and then someone will say, well, my wife just died of cancer. And so you have this individuals against a population. So how much does God work? I've always thought of God as a group of people, and if as a group or as a population, he might benefit us more than as individuals. And that's a part of a church too.
The answer, as with most things, is both. I mean, no, seriously, if you look at God, the history of God's relationship with his people, it is with his people, Israel. And if you come to the sermon next week, you're going to hear. I'll tell you now so you don't have to come. My word for next week is hesed. In English, it would be spelled H-E-S-E-D. And it is most often translated as, mercy, kindness, but, let me think. I've got it in my head because I say it every morning. Steadfast love or loving kindness. But steadfast love is the way the Bible we use here translates it. And every time Israel makes a big boo-boo, in fact, the first time, when Moses smashes the 10 Commandments because he sees them violating them already, And God has every right to be angry and let evil be. I mean, what's evil's going to befall them? Well, they're out in the wilderness. He can just leave them. But he says, I am a God of steadfast love. And he saves his people as a group. But he also intervenes and saves individuals. He, as a group, David, for example. So this is, I think it maybe answers your question. God does look after groups of people and spare them from evil. But David, who self-destructed, this is practice for the sermon. Maybe I don't even need notes. David, who sleeps with his next door neighbor's wife and then has him killed as a cover-up. And then realizes this is not something that only he knows. And he writes Psalm 51, in the first line of which he appeals to God's steadfast love, his hesed, to redeem him from what he has done. And he does, as we know. I mean, there's still consequences, and God has not promised otherwise. There will still be consequences to evil deeds. But ultimately, David leads a very nice life. Okay, so I think the answer is both. There will be individual protection from evil. There will be individuals where God does not intervene. We don't know why. There will be groups that are protected from evil by an intervention of God, and groups that will not. And we have no idea why that is. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, God once famously said. Yes.
I'm curious, a lot of these arguments about the reason for suffering and pointing towards the crucifixion, it seems to depend on the idea of substitutionary atonement.
Not necessarily.
Well, so speak on that, because I always struggle with that concept of substitutionary atonement.
Penal substitutionary or substitutionary? That's, people sometimes confuse, well, God was angry and he had to take it out on somebody, so he took it out on his kid.
Or that some price had to be paid.
Okay, well, and that certainly is traditional.
Right. But
God.
if you don't follow that idea, then how do these arguments hold up?
Okay. Whether it was atoning or not, and if it wasn't atoning, then none of this really matters, because we're all going to die in our sin if it wasn't atoning. That's what atonement is. But even apart from that, you can still say the God of the universe, the Creator God, who could do anything, can do anything, decided to suffer anguish. Not just pour it out on his kid, but he himself, as the Trinity we talked about previously, the entire Godhead is suffering in that event. And so to say that God loves us, I mean, there really was not any atonement language in there. I firmly believe in it, but I don't think it's necessary to say, look what God did and didn't have to do. And you're going to hear the definition, a definition of Hesed next week. That is when somebody who owes us nothing gives us everything. And that's what we did. But yeah, no, the atonement has always been part of God's system. But I think you can distinguish substitutionary, that he took the punishment that we deserve, but without getting into God's wrath had to be expunged on Jesus. Yes, hey, Phil.
You know, Chris, it kind of reminds me that there's really no such thing in this world as good luck and bad luck. It's either God's lessons and God's blessings.
And sometimes those lessons we don't get to learn in this life. But I think that's one of the wonderful things about the Bible. It's one of the wonderful things about our community. We see enough evidence of bad things turn to good, that we can have confidence that that happens all the time, whether we see it or not, whether we will live to see it. We've been given enough evidence to know that that's the way God works. Yeah, Bill.
Why is it that throughout the stories of the Bible, there is a group that gets it and a remnant that gets it, a group that doesn't?
That would come back to the choice issue, I think. He says, why do you, when you mean get it, you mean get the right idea? Yeah. Some people accept the gift that has been offered, and others would rather have it their way. As I think, was it Dante who first said it? I would rather reign in hell than serve in heaven, or something along those lines. That's not it, but you know, we do have that option, and so not everybody's going to get it. Anyway, any other thoughts on evil? Go fight it. Well, all right. Well, maybe I'll see you all next week, but not in here.